Hey everyone, I want to wish you a happy new year. I know that we all have a lot of hope and optimism for 2022, that we'll kind of turn a corner and have a much better year than the past one, and I hope that is true for everyone. I just wanted to add some comments as we are closing out Unit 2. I do apologize if there's a little background noise here. Family's cleaning up outside, so the vacuum's running. Hopefully, that doesn't interfere with you being able to hear me. Um, but anyway, in terms of housekeeping, please do remember that the assignments for Unit 3, except for the reading tweets, are extra credit. So today is New Year's Eve, tomorrow's New Year's Day. I do hope that you'll be able to take a deep breath. I know that intercession's intensive. Take a deep breath and maybe even step away a little bit and hopefully have some moments with loved ones, with your families, and however that might work for you. So that's what's happening here. If you do the timeline or the journal or discussion for Unit 3, those will be extra credit. They are not required. Please do read and post some tweets. Also remember, if you'd rather, you can post your comments directly into the margin of the text using Hypothesis. I posted an announcement yesterday about that, so that's something you could do as an alternate way of posting your comments on the readings rather than posting them on Twitter, and you'll still get credit for the reading tweets assignment, if that makes sense. So again, just another avenue, another way for you to do that assignment rather than on Twitter. All right, so I appreciate the very thoughtful ways that you all engaged with the histories of our earliest inhabitants of New Mexico. Something I want to emphasize right off the bat, and I think that this is something that many of us recognize, but Native history is not past. Or in other words, we have peoples and cultures here in New Mexico that are the foundation of New Mexico. The people who have been here all along, the people for whom this is the center. We talk about this as the north of New Spain, or the Mexican north, or the American Southwest, to Pueblos, to the Dene people, to Apache peoples. This is the center. This is home, and it always has been. Settlers arrived and took advantage. Maybe there were some positive things that came out of some of the relationships, but we should always remember that settlement happened and conquest happened through violence. I mean, the settlers, the Europeans that came, had the notion that they were superior to the native people who were here in almost every way, and they acted like that. That is hugely problematic in terms of trying to set up any sort of mutually... sorry, the vacuum came by again. I apologize for that. I hope the sound's not too terrible. But again, I hope you understand kind of what I'm getting at here. That we need to recognize that at the basis of colonization is violence, real and implied. And that determines and creates these legacies that are still with us today in terms of whose voices are heard and whose are not. So, for example, with the Oñate statue, when the Friends of Acoma severed the foot, that was an act of giving voice to a side of the story that had not been heard, that had long been ignored. At the same time, as we listened to on the podcast from 99% Invisible, for Nuevo Mexicanos, or people of Hispano descent in New Mexico, putting up the Oñate statue was a way for them, as a people who have been historically oppressed and seen as second-class citizens in the United States, it was a way for them to have their histories known. And so we see that in the public sphere, there can be these struggles over our past, how it's remembered, who is remembered, and which stories are remembered. And so we need to think about the ways that power and those relationships and in that remembering determines what is heard and what is not. I appreciate the thoughtful ways that you all engage with each other on the discussion board and even in your journals about the Oñate statue, specifically when making recommendations about whether it should stay or go. Something to remember about statues is that they don't preserve the past, and I will explain what I mean by that. If we want to learn the history of Juan de Oñate and his settlement of New Mexico, or his colonization, as a historian, from the perspective as somebody doing research, wanting to either make a documentary or write a book or an article, we would not start by going to visit the Oñate statue, whether in Alcalde or in El Paso or elsewhere. We would go to the archive. We would look for his writings. We would look for his letters. We would look for letters from other folks and reports from those who were part of the colonization effort. That's how the history is preserved. That's how it's written. That's how we know the bigger context of what's going on. If we really want to have history from all angles, we would also look to Pueblo stories in the ways that they have been preserved, both orally and in more recent times, written down by Pueblo scholars. To find that history. The statues don't tell the story. The statues do tell us more about the moment in which they were created than anything else, to be honest. So, as we heard about in the podcast and read about elsewhere, the Oñate statue was erected as a way for New Mexico Hispanos to show pride in their heritage, right, at the 400-year commemoration of the Entrada de Oñate to New Mexico. So it was marking that moment in 1998 to say, we are here, we have a deep history here. Choosing the figure of Oñate, though, became horribly problematic because of who he was and what he did, as we've read about. He was considered violent and brutal and difficult to work with, to put it most nicely, not even just by Pueblo people, but also by his own people, by the colonists that came with him. He created problems. He was banished from New Mexico by the crown. So again, by the colonial power, the atrocities, the violence that he committed against Pueblos and against the colonists alike, more against Pueblos though, were considered so grave that he was convicted and that he could never return to New Mexico again for the rest of his life. And that's important to remember. It was not just that we now are putting some judgment on him, but people at the time put that judgment on him for his actions that he did. And so then going back to the statue, when we look at a statue on a roadside, for the most part, it lacks context, right? People drive by and they see Juan de Oñate, and if they know something about him, or not, it may or may not teach them anything. Sometimes plaques on the statues can get people into a little bit more remembrance. But again, the statue is put up as a way of honoring and commemorating something about our past. It's a way of remembering a certain aspect of our past that we have chosen to remember. And so that's why it's so important to try not to discount or silence other perspectives in the process, or at least to maybe recognize, the group that is in power right now, maybe sometimes even unintentionally, by emphasizing these elements of our past, we have silenced others. And so how can we address that? What can we do with that? When people go cut the feet off of statues or take statues down, then they are engaging in this process of public memory. To close, I want to read something from a book called Settler Memory. I'll put a link to it, to the Google Books version here. This is from the preface. But he's talking about this accusation that people who are tearing down statues are, quote unquote, seeking to erase history. He says, however, when activists seek to remove a statue, they engage in the politics of memory, not to deny or forget the past, but to actively remember and make consequential the past's meaning and legacy for the present. As P.J. Bendrese notes, the phrase politics of memory refers to the power relations that shape what is available to be remembered, who is permitted to remember, and the practices, occasions, and timing of remembering and forgetting. I would adjust this definition slightly to focus not only on the what of remembrance, but the how of it, attending to the forms that memories take, often contested forms over the same topic, the same what, as defining the heart of a politics of memory. In this regard, then, efforts to topple or decapitate such statues as that of Confederate leaders and Columbus do not deny the history of slavery and colonial conquest, but rather seek to place the violence and horror that these statues represent at the center of our understanding of their relevance for our time. So, again, the taking action is actually part of creating a public memory and asserting which stories need to be heard. Again, that doesn't mean that we should forget the violence or the things that were done by the settlers. Of course, we're still going to remember that history, and we should. But we also need to put it in this larger context. And I think that's something that most of you are really focusing on in your letters to the county manager, whether or not you were arguing for the statue to be put back or to remain taken down or to be put in a museum. The idea is that we need to preserve our history. The question is, how do we best do that? All right. I hope that on that heavy-ish note, you're having a good day, that you have a happy new year, and I'll talk to you soon.